Welcome to Givers, Doers, and Thinkers. Today we talk to filmmaker John Papola about the power of storytelling and how it can be deployed to deepen our appreciation for the value of human freedom. Let's go. Givers, Doers, and Thinkers introduces listeners to the fascinating people and important ideas at the heart of American civil society. We speak with philanthropists, nonprofit leaders, social entrepreneurs, historians, journalists, and anyone else who will help us understand contemporary civil society's achievements and failures. We also sprinkle in practical advice for nonprofit leaders and fundraisers. My name is Jeremy Beer, and thanks for joining us. All right. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Givers, Doers, and Thinkers. My name is Jeremy Beer, and I am pleased to be speaking today with John Papola, the CEO and founder of the Emergent Order Foundation. How are you, John?
Thanks for having me, man. Let's have some fun.
We will. We definitely will. I'd say a little bit more about you to introduce you to our listeners before sort of jump into questions. Emergent Order, just so people know, is a nonprofit studio dedicated to heroic storytelling that embodies classical virtues and promotes a culture of American freedom. That's the first thing that everybody needs to know. The second thing is that you are a filmmaker, and a damn good one, I might say.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I want to draw people's attention to two of your works in particular, at least at the film level. At the Fork, which has been described as a, quote, beautiful, caring, sensitive, and surprisingly non-judgmental look at how farm animals are raised and processed in the United States, which I can vouch for myself. It is all those things. That's a great description of At the Fork. I really recommend people find that on Amazon and other places as well. That premiered at the prestigious Berlin Film Festival, given worldwide distribution by Samuel Goldwyn Films and Amazon Prime. And then your second film, The Pursuit, which stars New York Times bestseller Arthur Brooks, is about the search for happiness and global prosperity, and debuted on Netflix in 2019. I think we agreed. So those two things, everybody needs to know that, as well as Emergent Order. Go look up At the Fork and The Pursuit and watch them. Well worth your time. And then last thing they need to know is you began your career at major networks like MTV, Nickelodeon, Spike, and most interestingly, perhaps, as an economics autodidact, you have been involved in bringing the world of economics to tens of millions of viewers, especially in your wonderful, I can't believe I'm saying this, Keynes versus Hayek and Mises versus Marx rap videos, which is not a thing I think I would have thought would have existed until I saw that you had produced them.
I've cornered the market on textbook grade economics rap.
It's unbelievable. And they are textbook grade. I am watching them again recently. I'd seen them a while ago. The writing is so good. It's like, this really is what Keynes' theory says. This really is what Hayek says. It's amazing. It's even, and yet somehow you make it all rhyme.
Well, one of the things that was the most surprising thing about that project, those projects, especially the first two, the Keynes versus Hayek videos, was I had reached out to Russ Roberts, the economist whose podcast Econ Talk is really like a must listen, and basically said, I'm really excited about Hayek's ideas. Your podcast is my favorite thing. You're a great expositor of this stuff. Let's work together. And we arrived at this notion of doing music videos, actually partly because my wife, Lisa, said, man, this economic stuff that you're so excited about is so boring.
Right.
And we had been binging Flight of the Conchords. And so she said, you should do something like this, use music and parody. And we leaned into that. She's often correct. And Russ turned out to be actually quite a good lyricist. And I don't know why I was any good at doing this at all, but
he wrote the book. Russ Roberts wrote the book.
He has. So and he's actually always been quite a creative economist. So we, our collaboration on that defies people's expectations in terms of who contributed what. We both, I think, equally contributed to the lyrics and to the economics in different ways. Yeah, they were kind of magical things, these videos.
I didn't know that Flight of the Conchords was part of the inspiration for them. Another great thing people should watch if they haven't seen that series. So it's like Flight of the Conchords meets Hamilton as applied to economics, essentially.
That's right. I actually had people reaching out to me saying, I think that Manuel Lin Miranda copied your style, which I will consider a compliment of the highest order. Since we did come first, at least
Did
in
you?
terms of
Okay, I didn't realize
in terms
that.
of public viewing. Yeah, we Fear the Boom in Boston, Fight of the Century predate the public release of Hamilton, but
Okay.
nothing can take away from that guy's incredible talent.
Well, I'm glad we're not going to start a beef with.
Yeah, it's like an ant trying to start a beef with an elephant.
That's one way to get attention, punch up. But that's great. They are fantastic. And if people listening here haven't seen those videos, you can go to Immersion Order's website. They're right there. Or, of course, you can just Google them. I mean, I don't think there's too many other Keynes versus Hayek rap videos out there. I'm
very pleased that you start typing Keynes or Hayek and they come up pretty close to the top even before you write rap videos. So,
well, we'll come back. Of course, this is exactly what you're trying to accomplish with the videos. I want to come back to that, but let's start at the beginning in this sense. Let's talk right away about where you're coming from intellectually, John, because it's not incidental to your work. You didn't just make a Keynes versus Hayek video or a Mises versus Marx video because of the intrinsic interest of those figures as rappers, or it's even as thinkers. How do you describe your perspective and how did you come to adopt it?
I'm absolutely a classical liberal or libertarian, if you want to use whichever term you prefer. Temperamentally, I'm pretty conservative, and personally, I certainly am. But, my views on government are, honestly quite radical. I've yet to have anyone explain to me the difference between government and the mafia. And I asked that question seriously, and I never come away with a satisfying distinction.
That's the classical libertarian question, isn't it? I mean, that is the one that keeps people up at night thinking about what exactly the differences are here.
I mean, they shrink by the day, it appears, and I think of my grandmother. I'm 100% Italian. My whole family goes right to South Philadelphia and then to Italy. And my grandmother, my mom's mom, used to say, this neighborhood was a lot cleaner when the mob ran things. So, in terms of private governance, it's not clear that, government even beats the mafia all the time.
Yeah. Substitute Richard Daley for the mob in that sentence. And you might, have similar sentiments being voiced in South Chicago from time to time.
I love when you land in DTW. My wife's from, Lisa is from Michigan. So Detroit's become a bit of a second home. And there's Jimmy Hoffa Jr. in a mural above the baggage claim, unironically painted. It's really, it's like, yeah, welcome to Detroit.
That's one of the great things that makes places different around the country, right? The different things.
Which mobsters are enshrined.
Yeah, exactly. Well, how does a kid from South Philadelphia with libertarian or classical liberal leanings end up at MTV or in Spike, Nickelodeon, and that stuff? What's the story there?
I was always super interested in politics. I had a very conservative bent. In fact, in high school, my most rebellious act, actually, at least, I think this would count, was I went to New York City with a girl I really liked to see Rush Limbaugh's show. And it turned out there were adults, but none of them had anything to do with me or her. So it turned out that I sort of accidentally went by myself to New York with a girl from my class to be on the Rush Limbaugh show, and then I get back and my parents are none the wiser, and neither was I. And then they're like, "Well, where was Gabby's mom or dad?" I was like, "Oh yeah, I guess they weren't there." My first love was always creation. I wanted to be a Disney animator. I love to draw and sketch and I have a lot of artists in my family, my grandfather and my mom in particular. And when my dad got a video camera, that just changed everything, because drawing 12 to 24 frames per second to try to create an animation is obviously a pretty daunting prospect for telling a story. But as soon as I got a video camera, we started producing actually kind of political satires in high school. And so I went to film school, and I wanted to be Steven Spielberg. I still think he's the greatest filmmaker of all time. And and so when I got out of school, I got a job opportunity, entry level at MTV. It was actually the animation division. And
also called the Beavis and Butthead division, I believe.
It was the Beavis and Butthead division, indeed. And Beavis and Butthead was no longer in production, but Daria and Celebrity Deathmatch, and then there were several other shows in development. And so I slowly worked my way up. And then in 2001, at the start of that year, the dot-com boom bubble had burst, and my whole division got eliminated. And after a brief stint on my parents' couch, I came back to the city and got a job at Nickelodeon. And that's where I really started to cut my teeth editing, producing, and directing. And my tech nature was really helpful. This was sort of the dawn of a new era of producing, where the tools of editing were actually usable on your laptop or desktop computer. Final Cut Pro was in its early stages. And so while most of the producers were going out to these expensive Avid suites that were hundreds of dollars an hour to rent, and basically sitting in the back of the room working on paper while the editor worked on the video, I was doing it myself. I would get our company laptops and erase the hard drive and install all the software myself, so I had total control, and then edit my promos myself and sort of write and edit. I'm always very hands-on. I really like the process of making the thing. And that's how I built my career. I went to Spike TV after that, along with several Nickelodeon folks. The Spike had been sort of a rebrand of the Nashville network.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent 7 years at Spike before starting Emergent Order. So I had actually an incredible time at Viacom, and I met a lot of really amazing people and relationships that I still have to this day. So I actually found that phase of my career to be really gratifying, and not what people expect, at least in terms of, we weren't in Hollywood. I was in New York City, and it was a little more the business side. So
did you expect to stay in mainstream media, or did you always know that you wanted to go off and start your own thing?
My mom was always telling me you should start your own thing, especially during the dot-com boom when you had all these ridiculous companies going public. You're smart. Why don't you start some kind of company like pets.com? It's like, well, I guess it's all about market timing, right? Maybe that would have been great if I got out in time. The funny thing is, I've always been a craftsman, so I liked doing the physical work, the editing, the writing, the directing. But I really never thought of myself as much of a writer first. And it wasn't until that first Keynes versus Hayek video and the 2 years leading up to it, where I really started to get passionate about free market economics in the wake of the financial crisis, that I found a subject matter that was so inspiring to me, mm-hmm. that I was just constantly generating ideas for videos and subjects and things that I wanted to explore in different ways. And I honestly thought that it would die down. I thought that it was somewhat of a product of that moment, the financial crisis, the 2008 election, the first black president with Barack Obama, the first presidential election in the aftermath of sort of public use of Facebook and right. Twitter. So it had a different level of intensity than the prior elections that I had been an adult for. And I thought, okay, well, a couple of years later, surely I'll get tired of Ron Paul and all this stuff that I was excited about. And it didn't happen. And when the Keynes Hayek rap videos came out and went viral, and people were talking about them, and I was seeing teachers use them in schools and getting messages from students in Hong Kong about how much it meant to them to see this story told, I was awestruck. It changed my North Star for what I was supposed to be doing with my abilities and my desire, and it's never changed since then. It's evolved over time, but it's become hard to separate that passion for ideas and for the country and for the principles that matter, and and where I should direct my creative energies. They are one and the same thing for me.
What would you say your subject matter is as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, now that Emergent Order is well off the ground and you're making these works of art?
Well, this is the biggest change that's happened for me in the past several years. So economics was the entry point, and Hayek and Rothbard and Friedman and these were the things I was reading, and that's all very abstract, systematic sets of ideas, multi-causal chains of argument. And my approach, if you look at, I think most of my work from a directing and writing and producing perspective, I think most of the work is actually a kind of souped up Schoolhouse Rock. Whether it's The Cronies or Love Gov or Freedom on Trial with the Cato Institute, even The Pursuit, I think, would fall into this category. I actually like to be didactic. I've created media fellowship programs. I actually love to teach. If academics wasn't so sort of deeply to the bone marrow kind of broken and corrupt, I would probably contemplate being a professor.
Right.
But I think I like doing things a little too much to be a professor. But I love that. And so bringing like pop culture sensibilities to didactic content has been the way I've tried to express these things.
You say you like to be didactic, but if I can just push back a little bit, like the videos themselves at the Fork, these don't come off as it's not that you can't discern a certain kind of perspective underneath, let's say like, Keynes versus Hayek, but it's fair. It's not propagandistic. At least it doesn't come off that way to me. It really is much more subtle than that.
When I say didactic, I think I'm using it simply to mean intentionally educational.
I understand that. Right.
And I know that
in the sense of propagandistic.
Yeah, and I should recognize that. Yeah, most times someone says a video or film is didactic, it means
it's not a compliment. Usually.
Yeah, it's not a compliment. It means it's lecturous or it's heavy-handed, and I'm guilty of that too to some extent. There was an interesting experience I had on both At the Fork and The Pursuit, and this is not universally necessary or true, but in both cases, the tone and the tact that we took as a team and that I took as director was kind of, I'll say, middle of the road, at least tonally. It was not trying to get in your face and provoke you with an argument that gets you uncomfortable. It was an exploration, a kind of journey. And in early cuts of both, and when we screened them for test audiences in different ways, the number one piece of feedback I got, this was even more true of The Pursuit than At the Fork. At the Fork, the message was fairly clear, but what people wanted to know was, well, what should I do now? You've delivered this message to me, and I feel better informed. I feel inspired to change in some way, but tell me what to do. And in that case, with At the Fork, for listeners who haven't seen it, we explore the ways in which land animals, chickens, pigs, cows, both for beef and dairy, and on chickens for both eggs and meat, which are in each case different. What it's like, what their lives are like, what is the animal welfare experience at both the largest possible scale down to the smallest, White Oak Pastures, Joel Salatin type of operation. And the question it begs, and that we sort of end with, is your choices as the consumer are what drive the way these animals' lives are lived. That it's entirely on you, viewer, consumer. If you want $2 eggs, they're going to be produced in a farm operation that puts 5 chickens in a cage the size of an 8x11 sheet of paper, stacked 5 high and 3 football fields long, for the 18 months of their life to produce those eggs so that they can roll onto a conveyor belt at scale and be processed and packaged at scale. That's what productivity is about. And if you don't like the way that looks and sounds, it's on you. You have to buy a different kind of egg. It's not on evil corporations and Monsanto-like conspiracies. It's you, the consumer, because capitalism is poorly named. It's really an engine for connecting consumers with people willing to provide something they want. So if you want cheap eggs and you don't care where they come from, you shouldn't be shocked that where they come from is actually fairly disgusting and frightening to look at for almost every American in this country. And it's not a judgment on the farmers. They are operating according to the invisible hand of the consumer. And that message, even how as clear as it, I think, ends up coming across, the viewer still was left with, well, what do I do? What do I do? So it's like, well, go buy something like this. It's like there was a sort of there was a viewer demand to be given clear, specific actions, which was somewhat disheartening for me, to be honest.
Sure. Quite contrary to your very principles, that you're trying to pass along.
Well, and it's like, look, if we want to get into a philosophical discussion and have a raucous debate, let's have it. And I'll tell you all the reasons why believing in communism is the worst possible thing you could ever say. But when it comes to trying to present these sort of nuanced things, it'd be great to not have to beat people over the head, and you don't always have to. But it was striking. And the same thing happened with the Pursuit with Arthur Brooks. Arthur tackles subjects with a very conscious desire to reach people who are not ideologues and are not sort of set in their political tribe. But the result of that in our test audiences is it often, earlier cuts were left with people asking, well, what's this guy really want? Like, what's his actual program? Is he for welfare or is he against welfare?
Are we so conditioned to have everything presented in a very ideologized, partisan package that we can barely process, works that are not presented in that way?
No, I think what it pointed to was a couple things that I've been thinking about quite a bit. So one is that I do think that stories and storytelling is fundamentally not a analytical or didactic exercise. It's an unfolding of a character experience that reveals the character of that character. That's what a story fundamentally is. That when you read a good story or when you're told a good story, you come away understanding who the protagonist is as a person. That's why this notion of the moral of the story is such a deeply embedded phrase in our lexicon. I've said this a couple times in conversations recently that, we tell our kids the story of the little engine that could, or at least we should tell them that story, because of the moral implication of the story, that little engine doesn't care what other people are telling him about what he's capable of. He says, I think I can. And he makes it over that hill. And that is the point of that story. And I think that that's what storytelling actually is. And I think what something like the Keynes Hayek rap videos, they have elements of storytelling. Keynes and Hayek go out for a night on the town. Keynes has a little too much to drink. Hayek is a little more reserved, so he doesn't have as much fun on the way up. But the next day, Hayek gets up bright and early and gets back into his suit. And Keynes is struggling to make his way to the bathroom and ends up needing a hair of the dog to get him over the hump. And that's the story. And then secondarily, there's an analogy there. But as a video piece in general, that's the storytelling is actually sort of a tool instead of the totality of what the piece is. And I think that's the thing that I've grappled with a lot, is that most of these projects I've done are the use of storytelling to impart ideas. they're not storytelling products sort of in and of themselves for that purpose alone.
Mm-hmm.
Entertainment. Right. There's an old saying from, I think, Samuel Goldwyn. If you want to send a message, use Western Union. And obviously there's a lot of messaging and messages in media, and there's nothing illegitimate about using stories to get across important ideas, whether you're Ayn Rand or you name it, or the Bhagavad Gita or the Bible. Like, these things are all stories that have purpose to them beyond being entertained. But stories have a rule structure to themselves that if you try to subvert with your message, you end up just producing bad stories that are very, where they're going. There's no surprise. There's no ups and downs. There's no drama. And I think that's something that I still have personally a lot to learn, but that I think you have to use these things very consciously. And I think great storytellers, people like Steven Spielberg, they've got it in their bones, what the underlying science of storytelling, the dramatic structures that make something exhilarating and surprising and keeping you on the edge of your seat. And I think storytelling in our culture has really been damaged by how much agenda has been foisted upon things that don't need it. I'll give you like a perfect example of the Contra. I just finished watching Schitt's Creek on it was on some channel called Pop, I guess, which I didn't even know was a thing. But I watched it on Netflix. And as an SCTV fan, seeing like Eugene Levy and his son in this show and Catherine O'Hare, it was just like super exciting and great and fun. It's also like just such a sweet, simple show about people. But there is a message in it, in a certain sense. David is gay, and a fundamental arc of the show is his development in his relationship and his marriage at the end of the series. And I think that it's quite a beautiful example of getting people to experience something without banging them over the head with it as an agenda. It is simply part of who the characters are and their experiences. And no matter how you feel about gay marriage or whatnot, if you can't see the humanity in these characters in this show, I feel bad for you, because it's really beautiful, and it's storytelling with a moral message at its best, even if you disagree. I don't happen to disagree. I think that's just I think people should love and have whatever relationships they want to have with one another. But yeah, I mean, that's a great example of what happens when story comes first. And I think in being movement oriented, we can lose sight of that. I've certainly lost sight of it myself in different moments. And that's why you have to kind of continually remind yourself of what's the point.
We will be right back with John Papola, talk more about storytelling and in particular how it relates to the world of civil society and nonprofit organizations. Be right back. All right, time for one of our practicalities. And today we have with us Stephanie Walker. Hello, Stephanie.
Hi, Jeremy.
Stephanie is a senior consultant with us here at American Philanthropic. Hasn't been with us too long, came to us a few months ago from WHYY, which some of our listeners may know, that is Philadelphia's NPR and PBS station. And at WHYY, Stephanie learned a lot of things that are useful to us and are useful to our clients. And Stephanie is a particular expert in digital, email, social media, things like that. And so today, Stephanie, I understand that you are going to give us a few easy tips for how to make your emails better. Am I correct?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
All right, hit me. What do you got?
Sure. So one of the most common things I see when people share their emails for an audit is that there's not really a structure of the email that would be scannable. And something that our head writer here, Ian, talks about a lot is building the narrative and making something scannable. So when someone opens up your email, They might really love you. You might really love your email, and I'm sure it's amazing, but you probably have about 3 seconds with them. So you really want to focus on the subject line, the pre-header, headlines, and links. So if you're not sure how you're doing, open your email and read just those 4 things and see if you can get the main idea.
That's what you mean by scannable. And you can scan it quickly with your eyes.
Yep, scan it with your eyes. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Right.
one of the best ways to make sure you're doing that is, aside from just making sure you do a pre-header text, because I think a lot of people don't know that should be changed every time. It's kind of like your subtitle to your film to get people to read if they're kind of interested in the subject line, but they're not so sure. So make sure your pre-header isn't something like, click here to read online. You want it to be about what's actually in the email. And another thing is that I see a lot of click here underlined in blue.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're just looking at the email for a split second, you have no idea what you're supposed to click on. Something instead, if it's an article by Jeremy, instead of saying, click here underlined to read Jeremy's article, be like, Jeremy has something new for you. Like read Jeremy's thoughts, or something that has an action word and tells you what's actually going to happen once you click the link. So build some trust there. And I think another thing aside from scannability that can really make your email a lot better is to cut down the number of things it's trying to do. So Kierkegaard said purity of heart is to will one thing. It's exactly the same with email.
Thank you for bringing Kierkegaard into the podcast for the first time. That's great. Purity of heart is to will one thing. I remember that from Kierkegaard. So same with the email, huh?
Yeah. So when you open an email and it's a fundraising appeal, but one of the things that you try to do is say, oh, you should give money to us because our amazing magazine did these 3 articles. Don't link to those articles in this email. You can tell them about those articles in another email. In this email, your only link should be to a donation page.
That's really good. So yeah, and it is an appeal email. The only links we want are the donation page links. That's right. You want. I know that you want several of such links scattered throughout the email.
Yeah, and if you're doing a newsletter, you can have many more links, but even in a newsletter, the one thing you're willing there is to get them to click off of your email to go and read one thing. So you don't want to have bullet points that spell something out and don't have a call to action, unless it's a news update and you really want to make the newsletter itself the product, which can be really effective. But for a lot of people, what you're really trying to do is get them to another page. So you can have multiple links, but if you're doing a solicitation in particular, just the donation page link.
Do you have any more tips for us, Stephanie?
I think probably the final tip that I would give to everybody who's running an email program is to invest in your templates. So think about what it is that your organization does and what kind of content you frequently have. If you're a news organization, you might have enough articles that you want to post for every single week. If you are a pet supply or a pet saving type of organization, you might have stories about pets that you want to share once a week. Whatever is the common thing that comes up, make a template for it. So outside of your weekly newsletter, you might want to have a breaking news template or a cat story template, a congressional hearing template for when your think tank gets into the hearing. And by doing that, you have this thing that's ready. All you have to do is go in and change the links, header image, and headline, and just ship it out the door so you can keep from having to reinvent the wheel every single time something interesting happens.
We're going to stop here, but I'm going to add one more tip from Stephanie that I've heard you give to clients is you think you're emailing enough or maybe too much to your constituents. You're not. Email more.
That is true. Absolutely. Whoever you are, wherever you're listening for, email twice as much as you're emailing now.
One good final tip. Thanks, Stephanie. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
All right, we are back with John Papola, CEO and founder of the Emergent Order Foundation. John, you just talked a lot about storytelling. One of the things you talk about at Emergent Order is telling stories from the bottom up. What do you mean by that?
You know, our name Emergent Order is a very Hayek concept. It's the idea that organization, harmony, society, civilization emerges not through some design, some set of planners or politicians who architect reality from the top down from their perch in this ivory tower. but that it comes about through the actions of individuals and through their lives and those intersections that happen peacefully and voluntarily, and that is the fabric of civilization and of society, is an emergent, bottom up, from the ground level, from the individual making choices about their own life peacefully, that we get the goods, that we get the goods and the good. And so that is, in some sense, it will always be the fundamental ethos of my personal philosophy as someone that believes in freedom. I think that the other component to it that I've thought much more about in recent years, and that is a big part of what we're doing at Emergent Order Foundation, is the sense in which at that individual level, it really is our understanding of virtue and of the virtues of being a healthy adult, that freedom can flourish and be sustained. Because I think the founders understood this and spoke of this, that, free people at some level need to have a morality. They need to have a constitution that is not written, but it is embedded in their nature.
The so-called unwritten constitution. Yeah,
sort of to point to Buchanan. And I think that that's actually a really rich place for storytelling, because as I was saying earlier, the point of storytelling is to reveal the character in the character. And so if you want to explore virtue, storytelling is not just a way to do that. It is the way to do it. The Bible. I'm Catholic. I have my problems with the Catholic Church, but I went to my mother-in-law calls me a cradle Catholic, because when I go to mass, it is boring, and yet I find peace in it. And she's like, "You're a typical cradle Catholic. It just it triggers that childhood experience," and she's right. But the story of the Bible, the story of Christ, if you're Christian, is entirely structured for moral teaching. I mean, that's all he was, a storyteller. He taught in parables for a reason. I think the underlying structure of story and its basis in the tension of overcoming obstacles. The drama is when obstacles are placed between our character and what they want, and sometimes those barriers are internal. That what they think they want isn't what they actually need. And revealing that, they think they want the pretty girl. They don't realize that the girl with the glasses, A, is actually the smarter, nicer, better person. And B, what do you know, when you take the glasses off, it's actually a beautiful girl that's the starlet. And we could see that coming a mile away, but we suspend disbelief every time because we want to go on that journey. We understand what that journey is meant to do. And that's the point. That's what storytelling is for. That's why, again, we tell our kids stories. That's why our great works are touchstones for our sense of ethics and morality. And so one of the things that I've been drawn to, and that our Emergent Order Foundation is really setting itself out to try to do, is to focus on this sort of virtue-driven storytelling. And to find stories that embody, what I call classical virtues. I think, and a big part of this stems from what I just feel like I've observed in young people, both as a parent and as an employer. And I think something that's gotten lost is a certain kind of stoic virtue, a sense that the world doesn't exist to make you happy. And the reason for that is because the world doesn't have feelings. It is just there. The world doesn't care about you because there is no it that can care. If you believe in God, God might love you, but the world of the material existence is just there. So you have to create goodness. You have to create value for others. You have to recognize your own potential through trial and error, and you're going to make mistakes, and you have to experience those mistakes, and you have to develop the fortitude to learn from mistakes and overcome the childish things like being driven by your emotions.
Right.
You know, when people act like a baby, when you say someone's acting like a baby, they do the things that are now commonplace. They argue purely from their own emotional, self-interested point of view. They see the world through their own truth. It's my truth.
Right.
It's like, well, that's not a thing. You have your opinion and you have the truth. There is, I get the shorthand of it's my truth, but it's a terrible, corrosive shorthand.
Yeah.
And I think this sort of, coddling that's taken place is the biggest threat to the sustaining of a free society that I can possibly see. I think when I look at protest movements comprised entirely of relatively privileged, college-educated, middle and upper middle class young people, and this is not just in the United States with like the last summer, but all around the world, taking to the streets saying they want to dismantle their societies that have delivered to them the greatest standards of living our human species has ever seen. It just suggests a complete lack of some of these basic virtues, that they've been lost.
Is this the result of stories that have been imbibed, bad stories that telling or are implicitly or explicitly delivering the wrong messages, in your opinion, or is it something else at the bottom of that? And I guess regardless, can it be remedied by better stories? I guess you're betting that it can.
Well, to be honest, I have no idea if it can or it can't. But what are we to do with our lives, right? Other than pursue what we think is good and just and joyful. I don't know what else I can do with myself.
Right.
There is no other job for me than this. I think there's a lot of causes to the bizarre nature of our reality today, and that bizarre nature is a nature in which we've lived through decades of unprecedented uplift in humanity, unprecedented reductions in poverty, deprivation, predation, and horror. And yet we have the highest rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide in the West and in the first world that have ever been recorded. And we have these protest movements and sort of radical nihilist movements on both the left and the right that seem to take for granted this world, this magical, marvelous world, and think they can burn it to the ground, and that a kind of neo-Jacobin or revolution can take place, and that it won't be the absolute worst things you've ever seen in your life, like every other instance of this happening throughout all of human history.
This time.
This time off with their heads is going to go great. And my head won't be one of them, for sure. Definitely will be. And there's like these meta stories, right? Like the fourth turning, where it's just like these, these are almost generational. It's like a generational forgetting that takes place. The sort of shirt sleeves. What's the saying? Sort of short shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that is a thing. I think that, there is a Schumpeterian, Joseph Schumpeter believed that through the process of creative destruction, that capitalism sort of sowed the seeds of its own undoing, because the sort of children and grandchildren of Jeff Bezos will be the ones trying to blow up Mount Rushmore,
right? Because
they just have no notion of the process that gave rise to their privilege. And I do think we're suffering from that kind of wealth disease. But I think the other thing that's happening is we have a feedback loop, and this is actually speaks to our big initiative that we're launching in the fall. And that is, our kids today are suffering from anxiety and depression in greater numbers than ever before. The Coddling of the American Mind, the book by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt, is a deeply important part of the story. And what that book says is through a process of both overprotective parenting, which is rampant and almost accidental, that's driven by all sorts of fear. It's fear of globalization. And so I have to get my kid into Harvard, which means to get them into Harvard, they have to go to the best preschool, even though preschool is a complete waste of time, bunch of nonsense. And it's just babysitting. And now it's bad babysitting.
Right.
And then I have to overstructure their day, and I have to intervene because of bullying in every interaction they have with other people. So it should be of no surprise that kids that have been raised in this type of mentality don't know how to interact with others and overcome conflicts without seeking an authority figure, whether it's the college mental health facility or the HR department, or our politicians. It's this search for mom and dad. Who's going to step in to make things right because I feel uncomfortable? And dad for freedom to thrive, you need people to want freedom.
Right.
And being infantilized.
Definitely will not thrive if people don't want it. And they don't seem to want it very much right now for the very reasons you're talking about.
So I think that's one part. I think that's a big part of the story. I think there's a technological part of the story with the way digital information has put our sort of institutions and leadership across every institution in a sort of acid bath. The emperor has no clothes. So you get people like, honestly, like Donald Trump is a symptom of this. And I'm not like a virile anti-Trump guy. He had good things and he had bad things. I actually worked for Donald Trump as a side note because I was a waiter at Trump Castle in my college years in Atlantic City. I used to, none of the vendors would do anything other than cash on delivery at the Trump Castle. True story. You can only get stiffed so many times, but this is this notion of this protest vote. You're all fake. You're all corrupt. It's all drain the swamp. This is all part of this nihilism that's been sort of brought about by this moment we're in. This sort of we see now that actually, yes, everybody is as gross as JFK, and we didn't know how gross JFK was when he was president. He's like this emerald figure who in today he'd be like a conservative Republican, right? But so we don't know how to deal with that. So we have this sort of temperamental fragility. We have a culture that's reinforcing it through this critical theory, intersectional victimology that basically fails the most basic psychological test. When you divide people into groups and set them against each other, you can do these experiments. They have been done. They produce strife. Yeah. If you take two sets of kids and say, kids with brown eyes today, you're on top, and kids with light eyes, you're on the bottom, they instantly become tribal and vicious and hate each other. Yeah. These are experiments that have been run repeatedly all over the world. Yeah. And now we're being told this is equity.
Almost as if the strife is the point.
Yeah, almost as if division is the intention. And I think one of the biggest areas that gets the least amount of attention, at least in the popular culture, on all these fronts, is the fact that 1 in 4 American kids is being raised today without a step biological or adoptive father. And we just shot an interview with Warren Farrell, who's an advisor to our organization. His book, The Boy Crisis, is a must read on these issues. And when you look at it, it's kind of an auspiciously absent part of the story from the coddling of the American mind. But, I'm a dad. It's the most important role in my life. It's the one thing that everything else would be sacrificed for. And I have the great privilege, not of being white, although I'm mostly Sicilian, so I guess that makes me light brown. But I have an incredible father. I had 2 incredible grandfathers and a great mother and great grandmothers. But the thing, there are things that dads do for both girls and boys as kids, but especially for boys. This ends up being the case that are utterly essential. And every attempt by even the most sort of progressive social scientists to explore the impact of dad, and especially biological dad, for better or for worse. finds it it's an impossible thing to ignore that kids thrive and succeed in life. They are more resilient. They have these stoic virtues.
Right.
They actually even have more empathy when they have an active, present father. And I'll give you this one example that I think is really potent. When you think about as a parent, what does it mean to, you want your kids to have empathy? Well, being empathetic towards your kids, that your kid comes home, the teacher's been mean to them or they think they have.
Right.
And simply feeling their pain for them and empathizing and sympathizing and, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And let me give you a hug and a shoulder to cry on. And I'm going to talk to the teacher. And there's a role for that. But what you're teaching the kid by empathizing in that way, the way that on average is more likely to come from mom. On average, not in general. There's lots of variation, but on average, it's more likely to come from mom. What the kid is receiving is attention. The kid is receiving a focus on their emotions and the validation of their feelings. But that experience of receiving empathy doesn't teach you how to give or be empathetic. Empathy is an outward action. It is the attempt to understand the feelings of someone else. So when, on average, dad steps in and says, well, did you do something in class that would cause your teacher to be mean? Did you think do you know if something's happened? Maybe they've had a bad day. Maybe they had a death in their family. Maybe something's going wrong with them. Did you ask them? Did you go and talk to them and try to understand what's happening? That's teaching empathy. And so mom and dad, again, on average, have this balance of power kind of parenting, this give and take feedback loop. And you need both. And when you don't have the more masculine force, you're missing something. It is not replaceable easily. And I think that it's not a coincidence that the decline in dad corresponds with the rise of anxiety, emotionality, emotional reasoning, a increased popularity for sort of risk averse philosophies like socialism. I mean, why would you want other people to tell you how to live just so long as they cut you a check? I mean, if you see yourself as someone filled with potential that you don't even know what you're capable of until you get out there and try some stuff, you need to have that in you. And that kind of virtue, that kind of energy, I think is something that dad plays an important role alongside of mom in instilling in kids. And so we're going to be launching a YouTube channel dedicated to exploring all of this through that lens of being a dad and through the problems that are taking place that we think, have their roots in part in the collapse of fatherhood. We want to make dad into that heroic figure that can save America. But I think that's my view. I think that it is a bottom-up solution. We need people at the individual level to say, you know what? If you're thinking about being a father, take it seriously and be excited about it. If you are a dad, take it seriously and be excited about it. And embrace it. This is the greatest thing ever. And if you're someone who unfortunately doesn't have a dad, or you're a mom who's not in a position to have the father be in the life of your kids, recognize that that's something that you need to find a way to find something to help fill that gap. It's not, it is a gap that's there, that's real.
Right.
And there is positive things to do. You can't, it sucks to have to do it alone. And, and there's, and that's the kind of, those are the stories I'm most excited about telling right now. I think I've got the economics down pretty good.
Moving on more to society and family and culture from economics. Where can people find the new channel on YouTube, John, and Emergent Order generally?
The new channel is, we're still working on exactly what that's going to look and feel like as far as name and URL, but you can stay up to date on our stuff at our website, eo.foundation. Or if you Google Emergent Order, you'll find it real fast. And you can see our current and existing work and recent and past stuff, both on the website embedded there, as well as on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/emergentorder.
It's fantastic stuff. As I said before, I really recommend people check out both of the films. Obviously, the new channel, when it's up and running, we're recording this on August 3rd, 2021. So if you're listening to this in a couple of months from now, it may already be up and running. John Papola, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for joining us today for this podcast. Before I let you go, I wanted to let you know about a special fundraising survey that American Philanthropic and the Center for Civil Society have just launched. And we would love it if you and your organization would participate. If you are a nonprofit organization that raises money, you qualify for participating in the survey, and we would love to have you be a part of it. How does it help you? Well, it's very, very hard to find good benchmarking data out there in the world to help you know how you're doing in your fundraising program. Are you underperforming here? Are you overperforming there? This survey will give you those answers. So we would love to have you participate. You can participate just by going to AmericanPhilanthropic.com and clicking on survey in the toolbar. And if you do participate, there's some cool things that happen. First of all, you get a free digital copy of the report, the final report that we produce that includes all the data, and that will be very useful to you in your fundraising planning, management, strategy, all that kind of stuff. You also get a free 30-minute consultation with one of our consultants to discuss your results and just kind of talk you through what we're seeing in your results and how they compare to your peers. And then there's all sorts of other stuff. You get a $100 gift card for the first 10 organizations to complete the survey. You get entered into a drawing for a $500 gift card. You get a chance to win a seat at one of AmPhil fundraising trainings, which is like a $3,000 value. So that's pretty cool. So, hey, if you are a leader of a nonprofit, a development officer, a board member, we would love for you to participate. Just go to AmericanPhilanthropic.com, click on survey. It's a very meaty survey, and that's intentional because we get really great data and answers out of it for us to share with organizations like yours. So thank you very much for considering this, and we hope to have you in this survey. Thanks a lot.